When my daughter died under suspicious circumstances, I expected grief. What I didn't expect was to sit in a lawyer's office and watch my son-in-law inherit $84 million, while I was left with a rotting cabin in Lake Tahoe. I was 58 when I buried Clara, my only child. 9 months have passed since, but her absence still presses on me like a stone I can't set down. My wife Helen had died 12 years earlier, and Clara was all I had left. That morning, when I walked into the attorney's office for the reading of her will, I thought the pain couldn't get worse. I was wrong. The place reeked of polished wood and old leather, the kind of smell that clings to rooms where fortunes are divided and lives reduced to lines on paper. I sat rigid in a stiff-backed chair, eyes fixed on the brass clock ticking above the shelves. Every second felt like a reminder that my daughter was gone, that I was about to hear her final words, if you could call them that. Damian Cross sat across from me, immaculate as ever in his tailored navy suit, the knot of his tie sharp as a blade. He had the calm confidence of a man certain of victory. Beside him was his mother, Evelyn, pearls strung neatly at her throat, her eyes flicking toward me once with the kind of disdain one usually reserves for an unwelcome stranger. The attorney cleared his throat, the rustle of papers the only sound in the room. His voice was steady, detached. To my beloved husband, Damian Cross, I leave our beachfront estate, valued at $15 million, along with my entire investment portfolio, estimated at $22 million. Damian's hand closed around Evelyn's, and the corners of their mouths lifted in synchronized satisfaction. They didn't need to speak. Their triumph was written across their faces. The attorney kept reading, unbothered by the shift in the room. To my father, Fletcher Radcliffe, I leave the cabin property located at Lake Tahoe. That was it. One sentence. No explanation. No acknowledgement of the years I had raised her alone. No gratitude for the sacrifices I had made. Just a cabin. A decaying structure worth maybe $40,000 if you ignored the sagging porch and collapsing roof. My pulse thudded in my ears. Clara, my Clara, had left me a shack while her husband of 5 years walked away with $84 million. Damian leaned back in his chair, his voice smooth but deliberately loud. Did she mention the condition of that property? He tilted his head toward the attorney, though his eyes were locked on me. I've driven past it. Honestly, it looks condemned. Evelyn laughed, a short, cutting sound. Well, she said, her tone honeyed with mockery. Clara always said her father preferred simple things. I suppose she was right. I kept my eyes on the attorney, but their words dug deep. He shuffled the last of the papers. That concludes the will. Mr. Radcliffe, please sign here to claim the property. My hand trembled as I signed. The ink bled across the page, binding me to a future I hadn't asked for. Damian and Evelyn were already rising, speaking of dinner reservations, as if we hadn't just divided the remains of my daughter's life. I stayed seated until they reached the door. My chest ached, not from anger alone, but from the crushing thought that Clara had chosen them over me, that she had loved him and not me in the end. In the garage, Damian slowed his pace and turned toward me. His tone was patronizing, the kind a man uses with a child. If you need help cleaning out that cabin before you sell it, Fletcher, I know some guys. Estate cleanouts, top-notch work. They're expensive, but I'm sure we could arrange something. Evelyn nodded approvingly. That's very thoughtful, Damian. Not everyone would be so generous to a father-in-law who... She paused, savoring the cruelty. who clearly wasn't as important to Clara as he believed. The words hit like a physical blow. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but the will had already delivered its verdict. I had nothing. Damien checked his watch, the gesture casual, dismissive. "I've got a conference call with Singapore. Mother, shall we try that new place downtown?" Their laughter echoed off the concrete walls as they walked away, their voices mingling with the click of Evelyn's heels. I stood in the silence they left behind, a silence thick with humiliation and grief. For 10 minutes, maybe longer, I didn't move. I thought of Clara as a child, racing barefoot across the living room to throw her arms around my neck. I thought of her voice asking me to read just one more bedtime story. How had that little girl grown into the woman who left me nothing but a forgotten cabin? By the time I reached my apartment, evening had fallen. I sat at my kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee untouched before me, the property deed spread out like a cruel joke. Lake Tahoe. Just one line on a piece of paper, and yet it felt heavier than any inheritance could. I pressed my hand over Clara's handwriting, tracing the letters with my thumb. My voice broke as I whispered into the empty room. "Why, Clara? Why would you do this to me?" The silence that answered was louder than any scream. I drove home in silence that evening, the deed to the cabin lying on the passenger seat like a verdict I couldn't appeal. The city lights blurred through my windshield, and for the first time since Clara's funeral, I felt something colder than grief, doubt. Had my daughter truly turned away from me? My apartment was small, simple, a one-bedroom I had lived in since Helen passed. The furniture was modest, the walls lined with fading photos. Clara at her high school graduation, Clara in her college cap and gown, Clara smiling at me from a summer picnic long ago. Each frame felt like a window into a life that had slipped through my fingers. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey, staring at the deed. Lake Tahoe, 3 hours north. I'd never been there, never had reason to. Clara had bought the property years earlier, but she'd never invited me, never even mentioned it beyond a passing comment. The thought hollowed me out. Why would she leave me something she barely acknowledged? Was it a dismissal or something else? My phone rang, sharp against the quiet. Joanne's name lit up the screen. My younger sister had always been the one to call first, to keep the family tethered together when I couldn't. "Fletch," she said the moment I answered, her voice heavy with sympathy. "I heard about the will. Damien wasted no time, did he? Evelyn already called half of Denver to brag." I let out a bitter laugh. Of course she did. My throat tightened. "I don't understand, Joanne. Clara was everything to me. After Helen died, she was all I had. And now..." My words trailed off, swallowed by the ache in my chest. There was a pause, then her voice softened. "Maybe it's not what it looks like. Maybe Clara left you that cabin for a reason. She was smart, Fletch. She didn't do anything without thinking it through." I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. "It's falling apart, Joanne. Damien made sure to remind everyone of that. A shack in the woods isn't a legacy. Or maybe it's more than it seems," she said firmly. "Don't sell it, not yet. Go see it. Trust me on this. Clara loved you. I know she did." Her words cracked something inside me. For months I had convinced myself Clara had grown distant out of choice, that she had pushed me aside. But Joanne's conviction planted a seed of doubt in my doubt. After we hung up, I stepped onto the balcony. The night air was cool, the city humming below, a stark contrast to the silence of the attorney's office still ringing in my ears. I stared down at the streetlights until they blurred, and before I knew it, tears spilled over. Not the measured, quiet grief I'd shown at the funeral, but raw sobs that racked my chest and left me gasping. I cried for Clara, for Helen, for myself. I cried for the years lost, for the love I thought had vanished, for the crushing loneliness that stretched out before me. When the tears finally subsided, I looked back at the deed on the table. Lake Tahoe, a decaying cabin, worth little on paper, but suddenly impossible to ignore. Joanne was right. Clara had been deliberate in everything she did. If she left me that place, there had to be a reason. By the time I went to bed, my decision was made. I would drive north in the morning, see the cabin for myself, and end this gnawing uncertainty once and for all. What I didn't know then was that the cabin would answer questions I hadn't dared to ask, and shatter everything I thought I knew about my daughter, her death, and the man she had married. The drive to Lake Tahoe took just over 3 hours, winding through narrow mountain roads that seemed to twist endlessly through pine and granite. My old Ford groaned on the inclines, the engine straining as if it too resented the journey. I kept glancing at the deed on the passenger seat, the black ink of Clara's handwriting like a wound I couldn't stop reopening. When I finally turned off the main road, the path narrowed to gravel, weeds creeping through cracks that hadn't seen a tire in years. The cabin came into view suddenly, crouched among tall pines like something abandoned by time. My stomach sank. Damien hadn't been exaggerating. The siding was weathered gray, warped boards peeling away from the frame. Shingles littered the ground, where the roof sagged dangerously to one side. The porch leaned forward, as if the entire structure was preparing to collapse into the earth. Even the driveway had surrendered to weeds, only faint traces of gravel hinting it had ever been a road. I cut the engine and sat for a long moment, hands tight on the wheel. The silence was absolute. No traffic, no neighbors, just the faint whisper of wind combing through the trees. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the mountain air. At last, I forced myself out of the car. The key was exactly where the attorney said it would be, under a fake rock beside the porch steps. The lock resisted, stiff from years of disuse, but finally gave way with a reluctant click. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and the faint stench of rodents. Mouse droppings dotted the corners, and something scurried in the walls when I shut the door. A rusty faucet dripped steadily into a sink the color of old pennies. The cabin couldn't have been more than 600 square feet. A cramped living room with a stone fireplace, a narrow kitchen, one bedroom, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a gas station. What struck me most was not the decay, but the emptiness. There were no photographs, no clothing in the closet, no dishes in the cupboards. Nothing that suggested Clara had ever spent a single night here. I wandered room to room, my footsteps muffled by dust. It felt less like a home and more like a stage set waiting for actors who never arrived. I was ready to leave when something caught my eye in the bedroom. Half hidden behind a warped door was a desk. Unlike everything else, it was solid oak, polished brass handles gleaming even beneath a film of dust. It didn't belong in this ruin. I pulled the chair back and tried the top drawer. Locked. Odd. The others opened easily, revealing nothing but dust and a stray spider or two. Why would Clara lock one drawer in a place she never used? For nearly an hour I searched, under cushions, behind books, even inside rusted coffee cans in the kitchen. Nothing. I cursed under my breath, ready to give up, when I remembered something my father once told me. People hide keys where no one bothers to look, too obvious to check, too easy to dismiss. I slid the bottom drawer out and ran my hand along the back panel. My fingers brushed something smooth. Tape. And beneath it, cold metal. A small brass key. My heart thudded as I fit it into the top drawer's lock. It turned smoothly, as if waiting for me all this time. Inside was a manila folder, thick with papers, and on top of it, an envelope with my name written in Clara's careful hand. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. Why would Clara leave me a letter in a cabin she never mentioned, in a drawer locked and hidden? The envelope was heavy, sealed tight. My hands trembled as I slid a finger under the flap. 3 folded sheets spilled out, her handwriting instantly familiar. The date at the top read December, 9 months earlier, around the last time I had seen her. "Dad," it began. The word alone nearly broke me. She hadn't called me that in years, not since Damien entered her life. "If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and you've found the cabin like I hoped you would. I know you must be confused about the will. Please believe me. It wasn't because I didn't love you. It's because I love you more than anyone else in this world." I pressed a hand to my mouth, the letter shaking in my other hand. Relief surged through me, but so did dread. Why would she write something like this? I forced myself to keep reading. "Dad, I've discovered something about Damien. Something terrible." My hands shook as I gripped Clara's letter. Her words blurred for a moment as tears clouded my vision. She hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't cut me out of her life because she stopped loving me. She had done it to protect me. I forced myself to keep reading. "Dad, Damien isn't who he pretends to be. He's been stealing money, not from me, but from his elderly clients. He watches everything I do, my phone, my emails, even my conversations. I'm afraid of what he'll do if he discovers I know. That's why I bought this cabin. He doesn't know about it. It's my only safe place to keep records. If you're here, it means I was right to be afraid. The folder contains the evidence. Please, Dad, take it to the police. Don't let him destroy more lives. Don't let him destroy you." I sat in silence, her words pressing down like a weight I could hardly bear. Clara had been living in fear. My daughter had walked through her final months terrified of the man she had married, forced to pretend she didn't love me so that he wouldn't see me as a threat. And now she was dead. The police had called it an accident. Slipped down the stairs, fractured her skull. Damien had stood there at the funeral, tears carefully placed in his eyes, murmuring condolences to anyone who would listen. I had wanted to believe he was grieving too. Now, reading Clara's letter, I knew better. With trembling hands, I set the pages aside and opened the manila folder. The first document was a bank statement belonging to a woman named Beatrice Holloway, 83 years old, living at Sunrise Senior Living. In January, her account showed a balance of over $2 million. By March, it had been drained to less than $30,000. The withdrawals were marked as investment transfers, authorized by her financial advisor, Damien Cross. I flipped to the next statement. Samuel Ortega, 91, once had nearly $1.8 million saved for retirement. By June, almost nothing remained. The same pattern, large withdrawals, always disguised as legitimate investments. Another file, Lucille Grant, 74. Gone. Everything but her Social Security checks, siphoned away with the same forged signatures and hollow promises. My stomach churned. These weren't just numbers. These were lives, decades of work, trust placed in the wrong hands, futures stolen. I found printed emails next, correspondence between Damien and a man named Victor Langford. Cayman transfer, urgent. Need the Holloway and Ortega accounts cleared by Friday. Use the same shell company structure as before. Beatrice is asking too many questions. Samuel's son in Chicago is getting suspicious. We need to move faster. The reply, Damien, this is risky. Maybe slow down. Let things cool off. Damien's answer made my blood run cold. Absolutely not. I have it under control. Clara doesn't suspect anything, and these old people won't live long enough to fight back. Just move the money. I dropped the paper, bile rising in my throat. He had dismissed them as if they were disposable. He had written my daughter's name, confident she didn't suspect anything. But she had. She'd found it all, and she had left it here for me. Beneath the emails were photographs, grainy but clear enough, authorization forms with mismatched signatures, offshore accounts under shell companies, and notes scribbled in Damien's handwriting. One page froze me in place. It was a list. BH, widow, weak heart, no family nearby. So, dementia, son lives in Chicago, not checking daily. LG, diabetic, daughter checks accounts monthly, careful. It wasn't just theft, it was hunting. Damien had profiled his victims the way a predator studies prey. Vulnerabilities noted like weak spots on a map. My hands trembled as I uncovered a small digital recorder at the bottom of the folder. I pressed play. Damien's voice filled the cabin, casual, confident, every word dripping poison. Victor, we can't slow down now. I've got Lucille's power of attorney, and Samuel's son thinks his father is just confused. We'll clear both accounts before anyone notices. Then Victor's voice. What about Clara? She's been asking questions. A pause. Then Damien's tone turned flat, chilling. Clara won't be a problem much longer. I've been adding antifreeze to her coffee, just enough to make her sick. In a few weeks, she'll have an accident, maybe a fall down the stairs. These things happen. The recorder slipped from my hand, clattering onto the oak desk. I stumbled back, gripping the chair for balance. My daughter hadn't fallen. She had been poisoned, murdered slowly in her own home while everyone believed she was simply ill. Damien had planned everything, the inheritance, the staged grief, the perfect crime, and he had almost gotten away with it. I sank into the chair, burying my face in my hands. Rage and sorrow collided inside me until I could hardly breathe. Clara had been right to fear him. She had been right about everything. But she had also been smart. Smarter than Damien realized. She had documented it all, locked it away where only I could find it. Even in death, she had outmaneuvered him. When I finally raised my head, the folder lay open before me, its pages spread like a map of evil. My hands still shook, but now the tremor carried something else. Resolve. Damien thought he had silenced Clara, but he hadn't silenced me. I sat in the dark cabin, the folder open before me, pages scattered across the oak desk like pieces of Clara's last breath. My grief was no longer silent. It pulsed with rage, with the certainty that Damian Cross had murdered my daughter and stolen millions from people who could least afford to lose. For hours, I read and reread the letters, the bank statements, the emails. Every detail seared into my memory. But grief has a cruel way of turning to resolve when the truth becomes undeniable. I couldn't save Clara, but I could make sure her voice was heard. I opened my laptop, the same one I had brought with me to keep busy during what I thought would be a quick trip. Now, it became my lifeline. I uploaded everything, Clara's letter, the scanned bank records, the recordings, to 3 separate cloud accounts. I copied them onto flash drives, labeled each carefully, and sealed them in envelopes. Damian might destroy me, but he would never destroy what Clara had left behind. As dawn broke through the blinds, I packed the evidence back into the folder and slid it into my backpack. My hands trembled, but not from fear alone, from the weight of what I was carrying. It was more than paper and recordings. It was Clara's final fight, placed in my hands to finish. When I reached town, I pulled over at a gas station and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. The receptionist's voice was flat, almost routine, until I asked for Detective Karen Doyle. "This is Doyle," came a calm, steady voice a moment later. "Detective, my name is Fletcher Radcliffe. I need to speak with you about my daughter, Clara. You ruled her death an accident 9 months ago, but I have proof. Proof it was murder. Proof Damian Cross killed her." There was silence on the line. Then Doyle spoke carefully, the way a surgeon might handle a blade. "Mr. Radcliffe, that's a very serious claim. What exactly do you have?" "Everything," I said. "Her letter, his emails, bank records, recordings. You'll see for yourself. Meet me at the cabin in Lake Tahoe." I hung up and sat for a moment, staring at my reflection in the cracked windshield. For the first time since Clara's funeral, I felt something sharper than grief. Purpose. Damian had silenced her, but through me, through these pages and recordings, she was about to speak louder than ever. I hadn't slept more than an hour. My apartment felt smaller than ever, the evidence stacked neatly on my desk like a loaded weapon. I had already spoken with Detective Doyle. She promised to send a team to the cabin within the next 24 hours. Until then, I just needed to wait. But waiting has a way of turning time into a trap. By late afternoon, the doorbell rang. The sound jolted me upright, my chest tightening. I walked to the peephole. Damian Cross stood on my porch. He wore one of his tailored suits, charcoal gray, with a smile polished enough to sell diamonds. But his eyes gave him away. They were colder, sharper, like blades honed for a purpose. I forced my face into surprise and opened the door. "Damian, what brings you here?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, scanning my modest living room with an expression that said everything he saw confirmed his superiority. He sank onto my couch, making himself comfortable. "Fletcher," he said smoothly, "we haven't had much time to talk since the funeral. I thought I'd check on you, see how you're doing." His words were silk. His tone was steel. I handed him a mug of coffee, my mind racing. Did he know I'd been to the cabin? Was this a friendly call or reconnaissance? "You know," he said, sipping slowly, "Clara always worried about you living here alone. She mentioned more than once that she hoped you'd consider something safer. A community, maybe. Somewhere with support." "That so?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Funny she never said that to me. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. She probably didn't want to upset you. She knew you could be proud. The words landed like bait. I ignored them. What's this really about, Damien? He set the mug down, leaned forward. That cabin. Have you been up there yet? My blood ran cold, but I forced a shrug. Yesterday. You were right. It's falling apart. Worthless. A flicker passed through his eyes, gone almost instantly. I figured as much. Still, the land has some value. I'd be happy to help you find a buyer. Consider it a way of honoring Clara's memory. There it was, his angle. He wanted to know what I had seen. That's generous, I said evenly, but I think I'll handle it myself. The air between us tightened. His smile thinned, his jaw clenched. Fletcher, we're family. No need to make this harder than it has to be. Family, I repeated, tasting the word like poison. This man had murdered my daughter, stolen millions from the vulnerable, and now he sat in my living room pretending to care. I leaned back, meeting his stare. Strange thing, though, the cabin was empty. No furniture, no sign Clara ever spent a night there, almost like she bought it for a reason no one knew. For the first time, Damien's mask cracked. His hands tightened around the coffee mug, his eyes narrowing just slightly. Clara liked her privacy, he said. She had projects, things she didn't share with anyone. She was careful, I countered, always keeping records, always documenting things. The silence stretched. His eyes had gone completely flat, the kind of stare predators give before they strike. Finally, he stood. I just remembered. I have a conference call with Singapore. I should go. At the door, he paused, turned back. His voice was calm, but the threat was clear. Fletcher, about that cabin, properties like that deteriorate quickly. Sometimes it's better to cut your losses before they collapse completely. I didn't answer. I watched him leave, his footsteps echoing down the hall until the silence closed in again. I picked up the phone the moment the door shut. When Detective Doyle answered, my voice was steady. He was here. He knows something, and he just threatened me. There was a pause on the line. Then her voice came firm, decisive. We move tonight. The following morning, I drove back to the cabin at Lake Tahoe, the folder heavy in my bag like it carried Clara's heartbeat itself. Detective Karen Doyle and Officer Daniel Ruiz arrived just after sunrise, their cruiser crunching over gravel. Doyle was tall, with sharp eyes that seemed to weigh every detail before she spoke. Ruiz was younger, quieter, but there was a steadiness about him that reminded me of a stone in a rushing river. I laid everything out on the oak desk. Clara's letter, the bank statements, the photos, the printed emails, the digital recorder, and the USB drive. Each piece felt like another breath of my daughter's voice returning from the grave. Doyle slipped on latex gloves, her expression unreadable as she scanned the documents. Ruiz put on headphones and pressed play on the recorder. For several minutes, the room was silent, except for Damien's voice spilling from the tape. When Ruiz pulled the headphones off, his face was pale. Detective, you need to hear this. Doyle listened. Her jaw tightened. At the moment, Damien's voice said, I've been adding antifreeze to her coffee. Soon she'll have an accident. She closed her eyes briefly, as if steadying herself, then hit pause. This isn't just circumstantial, she said. It's direct intent. If this checks out, It's first-degree murder. I swallowed hard. Hearing her say the words made it feel real in a way even Clara's letter hadn't. Ruiz was already scanning through bank statements. Beatrice Holloway, Samuel Ortega, Lucille Grant, all elderly, all drained. The amounts match up. This isn't just homicide. This is elder financial fraud on a massive scale. Doyle nodded grimly. We'll need to loop in the FBI and the SEC. This is bigger than county jurisdiction. But for now, the murder charge takes precedence. She turned to me. Mr. Radcliffe, you understand this evidence puts you in danger. Damien will try to cover his tracks. You cannot be alone until we move on him. I met her gaze, steady for the first time in months. Clara died trying to protect this. I won't let him bury it. Doyle's voice softened, but her resolve didn't waver. And you won't have to. From this moment, it's in our hands. Damien Cross won't walk free another day. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a sliver of relief. Clara's voice had been heard, and now the law was listening. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the phone in my apartment, the evidence gone now, in the hands of Detective Doyle and her team. My job was finished, yet my nerves screamed that Damien wouldn't wait quietly. At 3:07 a.m., the call came. Mr. Radcliffe? The voice was steady, male. This is Officer Michael Harrington. I'm with Detective Doyle. We just executed a warrant at Damien Cross's residence. I gripped the receiver. Did you get him? Yes, sir. We arrested him as he was packing a suitcase. He had a passport, one-way ticket to Singapore, and more than $250,000 in cash hidden in his closet. He was trying to run. Relief hit me like air after drowning. And the evidence? We found more, Harrington said. A laptop with deleted files. Our techs already pulled offshore transfer records. A hidden compartment in his desk with ledgers linking him to shell accounts. And in his kitchen cabinet, bottles of antifreeze and a dropper. The lab will confirm, but it matches your daughter's recordings. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The truth was no longer locked in Clara's drawer. It was in the hands of the law, undeniable. Thank you, I whispered. By dawn, the story had already begun unfolding. Doyle called me herself, her voice sharp with focus, but touched with something human. Fletcher, Damien's in custody. He's facing charges of first-degree murder, elder abuse, fraud, and money laundering. Victor Langford is also under investigation. We have enough to bring him in within days. She paused. I want you to understand. This won't be quick. It'll take months, maybe longer. But with what you brought us, he won't walk away. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply for the first time in months. Clara made sure of that. The FBI took over the financial case, tracing Damien's thefts across multiple states. The total climbed past $18 million, more than numbers on a page. Each file name was a person. Beatrice Holloway, her nest egg stolen. Samuel Ortega, his retirement gutted while dementia clouded his final years. Lucille Grant, left nearly penniless. Victims who never knew my daughter had died trying to protect them. And yet, as agents and detectives worked through the night, all I could think about was the image Doyle described when they entered Damien's home. He was standing in his study, suit jacket draped over a chair, a leather bag open on the desk. Inside, bundles of cash, forged IDs, and a burner phone. He looked up, startled, but not afraid. almost smug. Until Ruiz put him in cuffs and read him his rights. That was when, Doyle said, the mask cracked. His smile faltered. For the first time, Damian Cross realized the game was over. When I hung up the phone, exhaustion swept through me, but underneath it was something I hadn't felt since Clara's death. Peace. Not because justice was complete. It was only beginning. But because Damian was no longer free to poison another cup of coffee, no longer free to rob another life. He was caged, and Clara had won. 6 months later, I sat in Department 101 of the Los Angeles Superior Court. The room was heavy with anticipation, every seat filled. Reporters, families of victims, even strangers drawn by the scandal. At the defense table sat Damian Cross, dressed in an orange jumpsuit that looked like a mockery of the tailored suits he once wore. His hair was thinner, his skin pale, but his arrogance clung to him like a shadow. Cynthia Bell, the district attorney, rose with calm precision. She laid out the charges: first-degree murder, elder abuse, grand theft, wire fraud, money laundering. Her voice was firm, her cadence relentless, each word hammering against the quiet. The defendant poisoned his wife, Clara Radcliffe, with antifreeze over the course of weeks. He staged her death as an accident to secure her fortune. At the same time, he orchestrated a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme targeting the elderly, exploiting their trust and vulnerability. As she spoke, screens lit up with evidence, bank statements with forged authorizations, emails to Victor Langford about Cayman transfers, photos of signatures that didn't match. Then the recordings, Damian's voice flat and cold. Clara won't be a problem much longer. I've been adding antifreeze to her coffee. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Some gasped. Then came the victims. Beatrice Holloway, now 84, shuffled to the stand with the help of a cane. Her voice trembled as she described how her savings vanished, how she almost lost her place at Sunrise Senior Living. Samuel Ortega's son flew in from Chicago, his voice breaking as he spoke about his father's final confusion and despair. Lucille Grant, stoic, told the court how she had been forced to sell her home after Damian drained her retirement. Each story added weight to the room until it was almost unbearable. Damian sat expressionless, though once I caught him smirking faintly, as if none of it mattered. When my turn came, I stood slowly, gripping the railing for balance. My voice was steady, but my chest ached. My daughter was more than a victim. Clara was brave. She discovered what Damian was doing, and she died trying to protect the people he hurt. She left me the evidence so the truth could be known. Today, her voice is finally being heard. I stepped down, and for the first time since the trial began, Damian turned his head to look at me. His eyes were empty, stripped of charm, stripped of pretense, just a hollow man who thought himself untouchable. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated only 4 hours. They returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Robert Whitaker's voice filled the courtroom as he read the sentence. Damian Cross, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus 70 years for your crimes of fraud, elder abuse, and theft. May you spend the remainder of your days in reflection of the lives you destroyed. The gavel struck. The sound reverberated like thunder. Families of the victims wept and embraced. Reporters rushed for quotes. And I, after months of grief, fear, and rage, felt a strange calm. Clara's fight was over. Justice, at last, had a name. Damian didn't look at me again. He stared straight ahead as deputies led him away in chains, the last of his arrogance crumbling with each step. 6 months after the verdict, I drove back to Lake Tahoe. The cabin that once sagged under decay now stood renewed, fresh siding, a new roof, a porch that no longer leaned toward collapse. Contractors had repaired the foundation, replaced the rotted beams, and polished the oak desk Clara had chosen. I kept the desk exactly where it was, in the bedroom, as if it were an altar. Every time I touched its surface, I felt Clara's presence, steady and determined. One afternoon, while workers were finishing the flooring, they uncovered a hidden compartment in the foundation. Inside was a small fireproof box, sealed tight. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, stacks of cash wrapped in bands, gold coins gleaming under the light, and a note in Clara's handwriting. "Dad, if Damien takes everything, this is for you. Wells Fargo, Box 2847. Don't tell anyone. I love you. $530,000 in cash. A savings book showing another $120,000 tucked away." She had prepared for years, building a lifeline in case she needed to escape. Even when she thought I had turned against her, she was protecting me. I sat there for a long time, the box on my lap, tears sliding down my face. She hadn't abandoned me, not for a second. Weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged. It was from Evelyn Cross. "Mr. Radcliffe, I don't expect forgiveness. I need you to know I was deceived, just as Clara was. I thought Damien was a good man. I see now he was a predator, and I enabled him by looking away. I am sorry for the cruelty I showed you. I hope someday, in whatever way possible, you find peace." I folded the letter and placed it in the desk beside Clara's notes. I didn't know if Evelyn deserved forgiveness, but I understood what it meant to live under Damien's spell. We had both lost family to him. Now my days are quieter. I wake to the sound of birds in the pines, the shimmer of Lake Tahoe visible through the trees. I spend mornings writing, letters, memories, fragments of Clara's childhood. A publisher has already approached me about turning Clara's story into a book. A documentary filmmaker wants to share it with the world, to warn others about predators like Damien. At night, I sit on the new porch, the mountains painted gold by sunset. I hold a photograph of Clara at her college graduation, her smile wide, her arm around my shoulders. She gave me more than an inheritance. She gave me truth, justice, and proof of her love. Damien thought he had destroyed us both, but he was wrong. Clara's courage lives on in every victim who received restitution, in every family spared from his lies, and in me, her father, who now carries her voice. The cabin that once felt like a cruel joke has become my sanctuary, my daughter's final gift. And as the sun sinks behind the mountains, I whisper into the stillness, "Clara, we're home."